Welcome, and thanks for joining us for episode 7 of Code Girls on Air Season 2, a podcast that explores all things technology, female leadership, careers, education, and topics within the nonprofit sector. In this episode of Code Girls on Air, we interviewed Susan Collins, an executive coach and career development coach. Join us to hear more about her story. All right, today on Code Girls on Air, I am joined by Susan Collins. And Susan, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what your career is about.
Emma, thanks for having me. My name is Susan Collins. I am the founder of the Network Concierge, where I am an executive coach. I work with people through their careers, and kind of what led me to this place in my life is prior to this, I was a talent acquisition leader. So I worked with large organizations to help build their recruiting strategies, manage their recruiting teams, build technology stacks to help attract the right people to the organization. And one of the things that I really saw in that environment was that people really didn't understand how to manage their own careers, how to move them forward in ways that were not only productive but made them happy. And so 4 years ago, I just had my 4-year anniversary. 4 years ago, I made the decision that I wanted to help individuals in a deeper way. And I went to coaching school, I got my ICF certification, and I started working with people to help them find that space in their career that fulfilled them.
Very interesting. So you help, like you said, ambitious leaders unlock the potential that they already have, but they might not fully see. What kinds of shifts do people usually experience in that process?
The interesting thing is that growth is uncomfortable. So a lot of times leaders come to me because they are seeing something that they perceive as a failure. Maybe they feel like their career is stalled, or they are constantly exhausted, and there's a pattern there that they can't quite name. And so I help them see that maybe they're outgrowing something that no longer serves them, and that's where that discomfort is coming from, because they are challenging their old ways of being successful and not really found the patterns yet to be successful in a new environment, in a new role, to ask for that promotion. So what I see a lot of times is that through coaching, I help them recognize the patterns that are no longer serving them, determine what patterns are going to help them be successful moving forward, and find their space and their comfort in a new way. For example, let's say there's a leader. I see this a lot with leaders who are maybe moving from that director to VP level. At a manager level and often a director level, you are still the expert. You're the person that has all of the answers and knows how to do the job. But when you move to a vice president, you're managing a team of people who are doing jobs that you've never done. So you have to get comfortable saying, I don't have the answer. What do you think is the best answer here? And asking questions instead of being the expert. And there are a lot of people out there in this world who can't let go of being the expert, and that stalls their careers out.
For sure. With a few other guests, we were talking about having that mentality of constantly learning, constantly just kind of being receptive and understanding that everyone around you is doing a slightly different role. And I think that that's really, really crucial when addressing those things. So your approach blends strategy with calm clarity. How did you land on that style of coaching, and why does it work so well for high achievers?
High achievers don't need more pressure. They're already putting a lot of pressure on themselves. They need a space to pause, to think clearly, and to say a lot of things out loud that maybe they may not say in a room of a lot of people with judgment. So I coach in a way that I like to be coached. I want to bring clarity to a space, and it's not really about pushing harder, but it's helping them align their values with what they're doing so that they can see what matches and what doesn't match. So a lot of times they may be responding in ways where they think their boss wants to see them do it this way, or they're responding in a way that the organization has kind of deemed the right way to do it. And if that doesn't align with who they are, we have to help them see those patterns and find their own way of leading.
For sure. So, moving into a slightly different topic, you spent 25 years leading talent acquisition, building recruiting teams, tech stacks, and hiring strategies. What from that world still shows up in your coaching today?
I am still listening. So when I was leading teams, I was listening to my teams. When I was recruiting, I was listening to candidates, and I was always looking for the patterns. What I am doing now is I am still listening. That was so important, but I'm creating the space to help other people listen and see the patterns themselves. So I'm not doing the fixing anymore. I'm not the person who is finding the answers. I'm the person that is helping other people find their own answers.
For sure. And seeing the inside of how hiring works must give some of your clients kind of on edge. What is a big misconception that people often have when trying to advance their careers or trying to land the next big role?
A lot of times people feel like they have to be the perfect candidate. They have to have all of the bells and whistles, all of the experiences. And what they need to understand is that it's about how they put the building blocks together. A lot of times we are taught, you take this position and then you grow into this position and you grow into this position. And I encourage my clients to consider lateral moves, sideways moves too, because that gives them bigger perspectives. So we get caught in this idea that we've got to move fast and furious, and that if our career is not going in the cookie cutter way, then it's not a good career. And what we really need to start understanding is, what do we like to do? What feels good to us? And then be open to the ideas of different things, because everything that you do in your career is going to add something to your next position. And so it's about figuring out the story that you want to tell through your experiences, and not getting caught up in, I have to be the perfect candidate and I have to have this, this, and this to move forward. Because sometimes bringing something totally different to the table that nobody else has makes you a better candidate for the role.
For sure. And I think that recently there's been kind of a shift from that hustle culture mentality where you just work, 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 to more prioritizing that balance and also prioritizing what you enjoy and what also benefits your team the best as well. So I think that shift is really, really important when considering all of these things. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
You created the 8 career narratives framework. What inspired that idea, and how can understanding that narrative change the way that you show up in your career?
So I am a student of careers. I want everyone to be happy at work. But I would see people getting frustrated because they would think that their job should speak for itself. That if they go to work and they work harder than anyone else and they do more than anyone else, that they don't have to ask for the promotion, that somebody should come tap them on their shoulder and say, you're next, you're going to get promoted because you've worked harder. And over the years, I have gathered these 8 career narratives that we're responsible for above and beyond the job. Doing the job is just entry level. Like, that's what's expected of you. Your boss is not going to pay you to do a subpar job. So that's just the minimum requirements for having a job. But there are other things that you need to do beyond your job to take care of your career. And I have pulled those 8 things together, and I've got a program that I work with leaders through to help them understand how these other narratives are affecting their career. So it's not just about doing the job, but it's about becoming your own career agent through the 8 career narratives.
For sure. And we can kind of talk a lot about trying to own your own story and making sure that you have complete autonomy over all of that. But sometimes it can kind of feel abstract. So what are some really applicable ways that you can take authorship of your career even today in just minor steps?
I think the biggest thing is to really challenge your beliefs and the decisions that you're making. So we say, I want balance in my life, and I don't want to work, 27 hours a day, but then we say, if my boss calls, I have to answer the phone immediately. You've got to start making sure that the decisions that you're making align with the beliefs that you have about your career, and that you're not working from fear, but you're working from purpose.
For sure. And I think, again, kind of a hot topic right now is talking about that work-life balance and making sure that, yeah, your job, no matter how much you love it and enjoy doing it, shouldn't be the only thing that you do. You should also be able to have that, again, that personal autonomy to be able to do things that you want to other than work.
You're exactly right. And that's really hard, right? Because we all, deep down as human beings, want to be liked. We want to be appreciated. And when we work from a reactive state where we are trying to please and comply and do all of those right things that we really get rewarded for at the beginning of our careers, right? Like, do it like I said to do it, get it in on time, make sure that it's perfect. If we continue to use those reactionary ways in our career, it starts to burn us out. And so we have to understand at what point does our career adjust, and how do we make those things happen and have those conversations with our leaders so that we can show up excited about our jobs and ready to go every day.
For sure. And how does communication within a team, but also in between the hierarchy within a company, how does that really impact your career and kind of the trajectory of it?
So communication is key. I believe in what is not said as much as what is said. And so a lot of times organizations will, or employees within organizations will not say things because they feel like they're not the popular thing to say or not the right thing to say in that environment. And then it starts to build up inside, and we start to resent our company and our job. I was working with a woman last year who thought she wanted to leave her organization. She was feeling some frustrations. And when we started working through the coaching, we started to realize the patterns around what she wasn't saying as much as what she was saying. And as much as it was uncomfortable to say the unpopular thing, saying the unpopular thing in this situation actually made the big project that she was leading better. So sometimes we're afraid to say something because we don't want to look like we're not a team player, or we don't want to look like we're not a good corporate citizen. And we have to step back and reflect and ask ourselves, A, what am I not saying? Why am I not saying it? And what would the impact be if I said it? So communication is key. So it's as much about what you are saying as what you're not saying in the corporate arena.
Mm-hmm. And within your 8 career narratives, how does that communication and then other things, how is it important to know the story that you're telling about yourself?
The story you're telling yourself. It's important to understand what beliefs you have that are driving your story. So if you believe that they are passing you over for promotions, or that you can't move any further, or whatever that story is, you have to step back and figure out how that story is impacting your work on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of stories out there, right? Like if your manager's manager, they have a story about you. If your manager has a story about you, and it's all from their own perspective. So back to communication, what you were talking about, Emma, that communication is really important. You've got to be communicating what's happening in your department, why things are happening. And it's so easy to kind of sit in our own silo and say, I don't want anybody to think I'm having problems. I don't want anybody to think that I can't do this. So I'm just going to put my head down and do the job. And then if you're not communicating, your story of getting it perfect and getting it right and getting it out on time isn't out there, because their story is, Emma spends all the time in her office and I don't really know what she does, and I'm not even sure, how the project is going. So you've got to communicate your story, and you've got to understand that it's not always going to be perfect, but the more you communicate your story, the less everybody else's stories are different than yours.
For sure. And kind of leading into that, some people can fall into those patterns, whether it be the not communication side or just using or just not having a very good work-life balance or otherwise. So how can young people start building a story that they're really excited to share about and live out?
I think the first thing you have to understand is you are already in this story, right? Like, so it is already happening. You can't get into this pattern of saying, I'll do it later, or I'll fix it later, or it will get better later. The story is happening right here in this moment. And so I really push and ask the questions to say, you know, what is happening for you right now? And what do you want to be different? The story is the story, but you own the change that you want. So it's understanding that the story is not tomorrow, the story is happening right now.
For sure. I think it's very easy to think in terms of, oh, I will do that later. Oh, that will be so long down the line that I don't even have to think about it right now. Especially, I think that young people, including myself, think of their careers and think of the future in such an abstract way, when really you can start thinking about that and really deeply thinking about that now in high school, and even like start thinking about that as you go through college as well.
You're right. I work with a lot of people launching their careers, and they don't want to talk about, they feel like if they use an example of being a waiter, that that doesn't really look professional or sound professional. But when you are a waiter in a restaurant, there's so many valuable things that you learn: communication, urgency, working together, collaboration. There are all of these things that at the beginning of your career, if you need to come up with an example of when you waited tables and you worked out a difficult problem, or you worked with a difficult manager, or whatever the case may be, it's okay. That is part of your story. That is just one of the building blocks that can get you to CEO, because you learned a valuable lesson in that job that is going to build and help you learn a valuable lesson in the next job and the next job and the next job. So it's all about the building blocks.
For sure. And what's a career habit or mindset that you often see holding people back, even when they're technically doing all of the right things?
Overfunctioning is the one that comes to mind for me, especially for high achievers. You see it a lot with women in the workplace, like feeling like they have to say yes, doing more. If they're not doing more, they feel like they could be overlooked. And it gets to a place where it starts to burn people out. But the story they tell themselves is, if I do this, I'll be safe. If I do this, they will like me more. If I do this, I'm not going to be the one that, gets laid off, or I'm going to be the one that gets the promotion. And that habit over time really leads to burnout and resentment. So real leadership begins when you do less from fear and more from choice.
So if someone listening is feeling stuck or unsure about where they're headed next, what's a small first step that they could take before that clarity and that confidence?
Look at your day. Look at all of the things that happened in your day and think about, where did I get my energy? What did I like doing? What are the things that really dragged me down? Start looking for those patterns of where you felt invisible, where you felt like you weren't showing up as your best self. And clarity really doesn't come from overthinking, it comes from noticing. So you can't move forward until you're honest with yourself about what's draining you and what's giving you energy.
For sure. There is a quote that I have been thinking about recently, and that is the idea of paying attention to what you pay attention to, which kind of sounds a little redundant, but it's just the idea of paying attention to what draws what you think about, what affects you, what takes that energy, what makes you super tired at the end of the day.
And I think that looking at those things is super, super important when you're thinking about not only just like personal self-growth, but also growth in a career as well.
That's a really great thing to do. I love that quote, and I love that you're already thinking about that, because we spend so much time overthinking, just getting on this hamster wheel of what am I going to do, what am I going to do, what am I going to do, and stepping back and saying, what am I paying attention to? Why am I paying attention to that? Is that even important in the long run, right? Like, is this something that I'm still going to be paying attention to for 5 years down the road? Or is it just something that's got my attention right now that's pulling me away from other things?
For sure. Yeah, so moving on, talking about, to wrap this up, talking about you looking back and also looking forward. So you moved from a hiring strategist to a transformative coach. What part of that journey has really surprised you the most about people?
I am really lucky because I moved from an environment and a job where listening and structure and strategy and getting results was really important, and I really loved my job. But I get to use a lot of those skills in my new role. I've got a budget, I'm running a company, I'm doing a lot of the things that I was doing, but I really get to do it at a deeper level, and helping people see themselves more clearly just makes me feel different. It really is one of those things where watching someone achieve something that they never saw possible has been very gratifying for me, and I've got to slow down and listen more and let people be responsible for their outcomes. But when you see people starting to see the patterns and change the patterns, it just brings me great joy.
For sure. I love that. So when you think about the future of work and leadership, what kind of mindset do you hope that the next generation brings to the table?
I guess there are a couple things. Curiosity over certainty is great, right? Like, not having to know all the answers, being okay with not knowing what is next for you, and learning to open up your ears and mind to seeing multiple options. The other thing that I think is going to be really great about this generation that is entering the workforce right now is that they're going to do it differently. My generation was told, you're lucky to have a job, you go to work when you're sick, you do everything you can to be the best performer you can be, and you work overtime all the time. And I'm really encouraged by this generation that's figuring out how to balance their lives with their work and be really great, smart employees, but have better boundaries and say, oh, look, it's 5:30, I'm going to get off of work because work will be here tomorrow. And there will be times in your career where things ebb and flow, and you're going to have to work a little harder because you're trying to, close a project, or, turn in a big project for another organization, but you're not going to do it all the time. And I'm starting to see your generation, or the generation in the workforce now, influence my generation to say, you're right, work will be here tomorrow, and we're all becoming better leaders because of it.
For sure. I love that. As our closer, thank you so much for being on Code Girls on Air today. Your story and your advice is definitely so fascinating and so important for the next generation of people in their careers, whether that be in tech or otherwise. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 7 of season 2 of Code Girls on Air. Next week, we'll be talking to Maddie Rigg, Director of Development for the Glacier Institute. Join us on February 6th to hear more about her story. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.